Hello, dental online trainers, and welcome to the Dental Online Training Sharecast. I'm your host, Dr. Dennis Hartlieb. Each month, I'll be talking with dental experts who are doing amazing work in the field of dentistry and talk about how they got to be where they are today, what their influences were, and their journey in the world of dentistry. And as a bonus, I'll occasionally throw in a few of my solo bonding sharecasts, where I share a little of my experience with you about what's going on in my practice and lessons that I've learned along the way. So tune in every other week to hear our latest episode. Hello, dental online trainers. This is Dr. Dennis Hartlieb with another Sharecast for you. Today, I am excited to bring on one of my favorite people, Dr. Betsy Bakeman from Grand Rapids, Michigan. I've known Betsy for a long time. We have served together in the Restorative Academy, and I've known her through the American Academy of Cosmetic Dentistry. Let me tell you a little bit about Betsy because she doesn't like talking about herself, so I'll talk for her. She is adjunct faculty with John Coyce's, with the Coyce Center with Dr. John Coyce. She's been with John for many years, and we want to talk about that for sure as we're talking today. She is a member of the Academy of Aesthetic Dentistry. She is former president of the American Academy of Cosmetic Dentistry. She is a accredited fellow of the AACD. She is an examiner for the AACD accreditation and fellowship. And to my heart, one of the most important things, she is the first female president of the American Academy of Restorative Dentistry, which is coming close to 100 years in existence, which tells you two things. Number one, AARD, we got to step up our game that finally we have a female president. But number two, this tells you a lot about Betsy, that she comes in as our first president. And I am honored to serve as her SA committee chair. And so it's, I've had more and more contact with Betsy over the last couple of years and a lot more to come, I think, this year as we're getting ready for the 2025 meeting. Betsy practices in Grand Rapids, Michigan, my hometown. So Michigan is close to Lake Michigan on the west side of Michigan. And it's a beautiful area of the country. If you've never been into the middle northern part of Michigan, I encourage you to visit because it is just breathtakingly beautiful. And Grand Rapids is one of my favorite cities where my grandparents used to live and where I used to visit as a little boy coming up from Detroit. So, Betsy, thanks for joining us. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Thank you, Dennis. And thanks for being SA chair.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's and for someone who's a completely unorganized person like me, boy, I tell you, it really puts your organizational skills to task. And so I've become way more organized, and it's been really good for me to sort of nail down trying to be an organized person because it really requires organization to fulfill some of these tasks. So thank you for allowing me to do it, and we're going to have a great meeting in 2025.
We are.
Did I miss anything from your bio? Anything else?
No, it's amazing.
All right. So, Betsy, I find it so interesting. We talked before we started recording about backgrounds of people in dentistry and stuff, and it's so fun. Talking to Bob Margis, Bob had no idea he was going to be a dentist until one of his fraternity brothers, hey, let's go check out the dental school. And Amanda C, the same thing. And Adamo, was collecting trash. Newton Fall was going to be a teacher. On and on and on. And from someone like me who's going to be a dentist since I was a little kid, I always find it fascinating. So tell me about your background. How'd you end up in dentistry?
So my decision came in high school. I think everyone can relate to the fact when you're in high school and people start saying, what do you want to do with your life? What do you think you want to do? And most of us have absolutely no idea. And I wasn't a really stellar student in high school, middle school, grade school. Came from a large family, blended family. So at one point there were 12 children in the household.
Holy cow!
And so you pretty much navigated for yourself. And so I didn't do a lot of homework or I did what I did in school. My senior year, actually my junior year, the counselor was asking, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? And I was starting to think, well, what do I want to do? And I was having my teeth cleaned, and I was talking to the hygienist about why she was a hygienist. And she was telling me she liked science. And I thought, well, I like science. And she said, and I like working with people. And I like being in the healthcare field. And so I went back to my counselor and I said, what's involved in becoming a dental hygienist. And so he said he was thrilled that I had come up with something, and he gave me all the information. And he told me that I went to high school in Midland, Michigan. And he told me there's a very good co-op program where if you have enough credits your senior year, half a day you can go to school, and the other half of the day you can work in a dental office. Or, I mean, there were lots of different opportunities for high school students. They had a great co-op program. And I actually was just talking to Jeff Graybill, who also went to high school in Midland at Dow High, and he did the co-op program.
Oh, what a small world.
I know, it was amazing.
Crazy.
Yeah, we didn't know that about each other. But I interviewed a couple different places. The second interview I had was with Dr. James Bakeman, and Bakeman's not my maiden name. So, and I'm now married to a Dr. James Bakeman, which is a little ironic. But Dr. Bakeman offered me a job. He had two co-op students, and they were his only assistants. So I was the afternoon co-op student and the assistant. And within 2 weeks, you trained with the previous co-op student, previous high school graduating senior. They told you how to run sterilization, the autoclave, where the instruments went, how to develop x-rays, assist him chairside. And then the handoff came, and then I was his only afternoon assistant. And then there was a morning co-op student, and we basically did everything. It was an amazing experience, and such a great opportunity. And I loved working with him, and I loved the diversity that dentistry had. I very quickly thought, I think I would struggle doing hygiene. It seemed more repetitive than I really wanted to do. And I think because I was having the experience of working with Dr. Bakeman, and it was so diverse. I mean, 1 minute we were doing a denture, the next minute we were doing an extraction, the next minute, we're doing a crown prep, all the things with the lab. I mean, I love the diversity of it, and I love the challenge of it. And then the opportunities went on. That next summer, the staff member Dolores, who ran the front desk, and she had a lot of arthritis, and so she would have these bouts where she would be out for a couple weeks. So I ran the front desk.
Wow.
and did all the assisting, and I mean, I just did everything there. And during that year, I made the decision I want to be a dentist.
So cool.
And I didn't know if I had the capabilities to do it because I'd never really applied myself to anything. But that was a great way to go to college, to have a goal. So I went back to my counselor and asked him what would be required to become a dentist. Dr. Bakeman actually took me to career day along with his son, Dick Bakeman, who went to Dow High. We went to career day at University of Michigan, and saw the dental school. And I made the decision I want to go to Michigan, and so it was the only dental school I applied to. When I made application, I was determined to do well in college and to go. And I actually got in after 3 years of undergrad, and went to Michigan. So just had that goal in mind and just did it, and no regrets. I mean, I loved dental school, and granted it was challenging, but I loved learning what I was going to do. So that felt really good. I mean, a lot of times when you're in organic chemistry in undergrad, things where you're thinking, how am I ever going to use this again? I don't plan to use this again. But in dental school, I really felt like the majority of what we were learning was applicable. I needed it. And so I really valued dental school. I really enjoyed it.
Where'd you go to your undergrad?
Central Michigan University.
Yeah.
And that's actually where I met my future husband.
The Chippewas.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I found when I was an undergrad that because I knew I wanted to go to dental school, it was so much easier to force myself to study than for, other other students around who just weren't sure what they were going to do. And, I had an end in mind. And so while there's classes I didn't enjoy, I knew the end was to get to dental school. And I think if you don't have that, like you didn't have it in your early years in high school, you didn't know what you wanted to do. So why, what's the sense? What does it matter if I get an A, B, or C as long as I pass? Because it's not going to influence anything. But I think if you know you want to become a dentist and you know the requirements to get into dental school, it's easy to become laser focused, right? And so I always find it incredible for people who are successful, who really didn't know what they're going to do, but they still had that will to be able to just deal down and do the hard stuff. For me, it's because I knew what the end was. So I think it makes it so much easier going through undergrad when you know that this is going to be your end point.
Absolutely. And it's actually applicable all the way through our careers. When I first heard John Coyce speak in 1996 at an American Academy of Cosmetic Dentistry meeting, that was my first meeting with the AACD. And I heard him speak and saw the dentistry was doing and saw him, he spoke on managing the restorative periodontal interface. And I was just blown away by the beauty and the science and the combination of what he was doing and teaching. And then the same with seeing accredited members, their dentistry. And I remember thinking, that has to feel really good to be able to deliver dentistry that looks like that and functions over time. I mean, some of the cases that were being shown by John Coyce that he had done decades prior that were still beautiful and nice and had served the patient exceedingly well. And I just thought, I want to do whatever it takes to be able to do that. And so I signed up to become accredited. I didn't even know what the process meant, but I thought, if that helps me get there, I want to do that. And so I think that lesson of knowing where you want to go, and then even when it gets tough, you keep going because you know what the end point is.
Yeah.
And you keep striving. And so I think in dentistry as well, in our careers, that same lesson applies.
Totally. I have a couple questions for you about dental school. So when I went to Michigan, also, as many of these people know, and I wore my Michigan hat for Betsy this morning. So when I was at Michigan, we probably close to 50% of our class was women, and I graduated in 1988. So I came in 85, graduated in 88. What was the percentage of women in your dental school class when you were there?
It was about 20%. We had 25 women in our class, and our class size was 150. And so I think that 20%. I think that's about 20% of the class, maybe even a little less. But
so dentistry been the old boys club, and it's changing for sure. So I was recently at Marquette Dental School. They had a hooding ceremony, which is really cool. And I don't know if you're familiar with this. And so
I am.
Yeah. So at Michigan, I remember graduating, we had our hood, and I didn't understand the significance of the hooding. And so now I get it. I mean, I didn't know for 40 years what's the big deal about the hood, but really it is the entry into the profession, right? Now you're a professional. They had a beautiful ceremony, and I would say at least 50% of the graduating class were women. But what I think was really interesting, they announced the OKU recipients. And Betsy, I think there was 12 recipients, and 10 of them were women. In fact, the first, I think 8 or 9 announced for women. I'm like, this is like an all-women society, apparently. I didn't get the memo. And so I think it's just incredible. And I think it's wonderful how it's become so much more inclusive. But I do wonder about any struggles you may have had when it was a newer profession for women back in the day. And if you had struggles with that in sort of the old boys club mentality in the dental school, did you see any effects of that?
I didn't really. I know women have had challenges with that, but it was all I knew. I mean, even in the sciences, in undergrad, most of our faculty were men.
Yeah.
And so, with physics and chemistry and it was primarily men. And so I was just accustomed to that. I learned from who I could learn from. Mm-hmm. And I didn't really notice that. People were, all my instructors were very encouraging. I was asked to stand and teach in the operative department. And I did that for a year. And stayed on and taught third-year dental students and in the clinic, and that was sort of my introduction to teaching, which I really enjoyed. Actually, my introduction was probably growing up because I was the oldest, and so when you have a large family, you teach, and you're always working with the younger children in the family and leading, and so. There was definitely, an affinity for that. I enjoyed that. I enjoy seeing the light bulb go on in others, because I enjoy it so much when I have the opportunity to learn. When the light bulb goes on, when something clicks, it's such an amazing feeling to have that learning, and so. When I can see that happen in others, I get to relive it, and I really enjoy that.
That's so cool. So was it like Peter Yeaman and Dennison and those guys that you're under?
Yes, Dr. Snyder, the Heist brothers.
Yeah, we were so fortunate at Michigan. We had such a strong operative department. We had a Master's of Operative program, so many of our instructors had just incredible skills, and they were just wonderful teachers. I mean, they just shared their information so freely. We were very, very fortunate, I think, in Michigan be underneath their guidance. That's very cool.
Mm-hmm.
It's so interesting. So I think you're right, and it's interesting. So many people that I've talked to have a teaching background, like Kinzer's. Dad was in education, and Greg thought he was going to be going into education. Newton Fall was going to be going into education. And I think it's sort of so much of the people who are educating in dentistry have that sort of, familiarity or this essence of education. And I think it makes a big difference because you can tell educators who are doing it just to be up there on stage and people who actually want to share, because like you said, they see that light bulb go off, and then you get the same experience when you see that happen. I think that's really well put. That's really cool.
Yeah. Yes. No, I love that piece. I'm the opposite. I actually don't like to be on stage. But I like small groups, and I love working with individual people and seeing people grow and learn. It gives me a lot of joy.
When you graduated from Michigan, did you then go and join Dr. Bakeman, or what did you do for your dental career?
Well, my husband and I got married. He was finishing medical school. We didn't start dating until I was in my third year of dental school. And then he had done 4 years at Central Michigan. And then came down to Michigan and went to medical school. So he was graduating. We moved to Grand Rapids, which is Jim's hometown. He was born and raised here in Grand Rapids. And he did his internship here at Butterworth Hospital in general surgery. And he had matched to do orthopedic surgery out on Long Island near Adamo at Stony Brook University. And so we moved for 4 years. We lived out on Long Island while he did his residency. So I did associateships here in Grand Rapids and then out on Long Island. And I worked at several different practices initially just to have enough hours to work. And then settled on the one practice that I really enjoyed working with was Dr. Fred Pashkas, and in Massapequa, Long Island, and it was a great experience. I loved this staff, and I loved working there. Fred is a great dentist, and it was a lot of fun. And it's different culturally. The East Coast and Long Island's
right
different.
In Midland, Michigan.
Yes. So they used to call me the Breck girl. They'd just say that they would tease me about being squeaky clean but I built a practice there within 2 years. we had our first daughter. And so I remember being home with Emily, and Fred would call me almost every day to see how I was doing. And he said, "So how old's the baby now?" And I said, she's 2 weeks old. And he said, "So you're probably not going to be back in the office for a little bit yet." And I said, are you really dying? He said, "I'm really dying without you." And I said, "Well, I could come in on Saturdays when Jim's home and help out." He said, "That would be great." So by week 3, I was back in the office on Saturdays to help out. And I had built a full-time practice after being in the office for 2 years. But I tried to go back part-time, and I just kept adding hours to accommodate everyone. And by the time we left 2 years later, I was back to a full-time practice, had a 2-year-old, and it was hard. It was challenging. The commutes were long there. It was very challenging. So when we moved to Grand Rapids, Jim joined a group here in Grand Rapids. We just made the decision to move back to Michigan. And I made the decision that I wanted, if I was going to be an associate, and I wanted to be an associate for several reasons, but the biggest reason was for family. Jim was new in practice. He's, took trauma call. He many times could be gone all night. We couldn't depend on him being able to be here for the kids. And I became pregnant again. And so we were having a second child, and I made the decision, I'm going to be an associate, and I'm going to be adamant that I'm only going to work part-time until the kids are a little older. And I'm not going to allow that to happen where I just keep making work the priority. And so I joined a great dentist here, Bruce Stewart in Grand Rapids. He was a member of the AACD, and that's how I became introduced to the AACD. He was a accredited member. He became accredited while I practiced with him. And he wanted me to work more, but I kept saying, no, this is the line I've drawn in the sand, and so that I can be there to get my kids off to school. Most days I was home to see them when they got home. So Wednesdays I worked noon till 8, and that was the one day of the week that Jim told when they made the call schedule that I can't take call on Wednesdays. Mm-hmm. So he made the commitment to be there for the kids in the evening on Wednesdays so that I could then work late. And so we made it work, but I worked 2.5 days a week until they were both in school. Both the girls were in school. And I have no regrets about that. I'm really happy that I did that.
I'm glad you brought that up. A few things to unravel. Number one, for those who don't know, a Breck Girl. Breck was a shampoo that was very popular in the 80s, and they would have these, on the commercial, they'd have these models with beautiful flowing hair, right? Long hair. And it's just super clean, healthy shampoo for the hair. So I think that's that Breck Girl that you brought up.
Yeah.
Just as a point of reference for some of our younger viewers probably don't know what that means.
That's right.
Secondly, so I'm super curious, going back when you moved to New York. And so, one of the things about dentistry that's good and bad is that, man, it's like, you build a foundation, and so one of the things that I liked about dentistry, that gets harder now, is that you can't really move around. Now that everyone's working remotely, it's hard to do as a dentist. So you talk about, you just moved to New York and then you got some associates and you worked around. What was that like? I mean, you're a young dentist. You're in a whole different community. You're in a foreign land because you're in Long Island. So they speak a different language, different type of people from the Midwest. Like, I can't imagine how much anxiety I would have had and how much like angst I would have had going through that process. Was that like, do you remember what it felt like?
I do remember that it was uncomfortable. I remember, going for interviews, talking to people, and sometimes it just was not a fit. like it was, like even the person I was interviewing with would say, I don't think this is the right thing for you.
Mm.
It was a clinic, and there was another office I worked in the evenings that was, I don't know, it's some kind of service contract, and wanted me to use the in-house lab, and I had tried that, and I wasn't happy with the quality, and so I just couldn't do that. So yeah, it was challenging. I remember having the interview with Fred, and I just thought, I just really think I could do well here, and I wrote him a note after the interview, just expressing how much I enjoyed speaking with him, and that I really felt like we could do well together, and that he told me when he called me to have me come back and wanted to hire me, he said, it was your note that made the difference. He said, he said there was one other person I was strongly leaning toward, another dentist. He said, but then when I received your note, I decided that it would be you. And
Wow.
and so I've always been one for personal communication and handwritten notes. I think it's really important with our colleagues, with patients. Till to this day, I do that. I mean, even I tell my daughters, when you receive a gift in the mail,
Right.
you sit down and write a thank you note. And I'm always so proud when I receive a thank you note from them.
Yeah. Oh, how cool.
Yeah. So it makes me feel good.
One of the challenges, I think, for younger dentists coming out is making the decision, are they going to go into a corporate dental field, or if they're going to go into a more private, practice. And I think that's a great tip, right? I think it's this personal connection that separates between, I think you can build up your resume, you can do all sorts of things, but really it's that personal contact and things like reaching out, sending a letter, and making sure that the person that you're interviewing with understands that you are interested in why you're interested in that position. I think that's great information. And as much as things change in our world, that will never change. The handwritten letter, the thank you, that will never change. And so for those out there, those are the little things that can make a difference when someone's looking who's going to come in and be part of their practice, because being part of our practice is like being part of our family. And we need someone who's going to represent us as well as, manage our patients and stuff. So that's super great advice. Tagging onto that, you said it took a couple of years for you to build a practice, which I find phenomenal. And I'm wondering what tips would you have someone starting out and they're either in a practice or they're starting out their own practice? What did you learn then that you were able to apply to your new practice about how to build a practice?
Well, one thing I wanted to tag on to what you had just said was, again, when you're searching for something, is knowing what you want. Like after I left that interview, I thought, I think it's helpful to write down what you want, to put it on paper and force your brain to think about what you want in a practice, what you want to see your practice be like, who you want to practice, if you're going to practice with someone, to write it down and know as much as you can about what you want. And then when it presents itself, go after it. So you shouldn't need to, so like the things like the financial compensation and all those other little pieces, that can all be worked out. But, so if you come across as that's your priority, and that's a different set of values from the person you want to join, that's going to come across.
Yep.
And so if you're going to have to say, well, I'm not sure, and I've got a few other offers, and because when the offer of your dream comes across, you're going to maybe need to take a little time to think about it, but, you should know. You should already know that's what I want. That's where I'm going. And so I think that is really important for young people to think about. As far as building a practice, so, I talked about the fact that I was an associate. To join someone that's willing to pump you up. I mean, when I was with Fred, he did some amazing things. Like he was ready to turn over certain things. The children in the practice. He didn't really care to do extractions or endo. So he was, and some of it wasn't things that I was super excited about doing, but it was an entry into the patient pool.
Right.
And so he would come in, especially if it was an emergency patient, he might have seen the emergency, but then he would call me in and he would say, this tooth needs a crown. You've broken the cusp on it. He said, it's way back in the back of the mouth. He says, it's a tough area to get to. Dr. Bakeman is much more agile. She's younger. She has better eyes. He would put himself down to build me up and in the patient's eyes. And or he'd say things like, I don't do blood anymore. He'd say, this is she'll do a much better job for you. And so he was very self-deprecating. Patients would laugh, but they would allow me to do things even though they didn't know me very well. And of course, when you do your best, you're kind, you're personable, you're unsaleable, patients, then they would start referring patients. And so that's how I built the practice. The staff was very supportive of me. And that was really wonderful as well.
That's really cool. I think it's so important for young dentists to understand when they join a practice, unless somebody's retiring or someone's leaving the practice, you have to grow a practice within the practice. And that's really about both the owner dentist, making sure that they're building up the new dentist and feeding them some patients, but also then the associate dentist understanding that they have to build a practice within the practice, because there's no way a dentist has two full-time practices working by themselves all at the same time. So someone coming in has to understand that.
You do. And as an associate or even a new practice owner, in general, you don't have a lot of money. You're not going to be spending a lot of money with marketing. And back then, marketing was very expensive. Now there's social media marketing, which you can do yourself, which can be much more affordable. But you do need to market in some way. For me, it was doing things like writing a handwritten note to a patient that I enjoyed seeing them. I welcome to see any of their other family members, that type of thing. I would also, when I started my practice, so after I was an associate for 20 years, it wasn't that I was unhappy, but I made the decision in 2003, and then started a new practice in 2004 that I built from the ground up, built the building, started a new office, and did my own thing for the first time in my career. And it was because I wanted that challenge. I was ready for a new chapter. But I had a few patients that had followed me, but I was starting from scratch. And so I had to build a practice. And so I would do things like, I would, if there was a great case I'd done, for accreditation, I would print the photos, and put them inside a card or a letter. And I would send them to all the specialists in town saying, I'm really excited about, this course I took on composite resin, and I've learned to do complete composite veneers, which is a great service for young children with microdontic laterals or people with wear. And this is a case that I just finished. And I would send the photos along with, and I would send it out to, it's the cost of a stamp. And it's really just time. I remember taking a course from Pat Allen on using allograft and grafting. And my first few cases, Pat's an amazing teacher, and my first few cases, they were beautiful. And so I printed the before and after of the recession, and now we've grafted it and said, I'm able to do this without harvesting from the palate, and sent it out to other specialists and to general dentists to let them know that we could do that. And at that point, no one else in Grand Rapids was using allograft, to my knowledge. And so it's a great way to build a practice. And it doesn't take much, but you have to do it. And I don't like necessarily tooting my own horn, but I one time had a patient tell me it's really important to let people know what you do. And she said, for her, she was in provisionals. She was struggling to find someone that could meet her expectations, which were not unreasonable.
Sure.
She said, do you know how hard it is for someone like me to find someone like you? And that really, it was almost like she had punched me in the gut, because I don't do a lot of marketing to the public. And it's primarily word of mouth. But you can build a practice that way. But maybe it's not the best thing for letting everyone know what you do.
Yeah, that's a fine line. That's
Yes.
very interesting. We have a referral book that we have a bunch of our cases, and then so that Chris and I have done together, and then we've sent that. It's, I don't know, maybe it has 30 pages, but it's a smaller book, and it's just before and afters with a little story of what the patient, what we did, and that has been an incredible resource for referrals. And so we send it to our orthodontists, our pediatric dentists, our periodontists, our oral surgeons. And then that's really how we get most of our patients in our practice are from specialists, which are the best patients to get, because they already are aware of much of what's going on in their mouth, and that makes it much easier to have those conversations. So I think that's a great idea. I love these little marketing ideas to help young dentists do things inexpensively, but to help them start to build their practices, because it's so important that it hasn't changed. That game hasn't changed. And I think maybe it's even harder today in today's crazy world of DSOs and everything else that's going on. I think it's maybe even a little more challenging. So very cool.
Yeah. So, but to do that book that you did, and we've done something similar as well. You had to be able to deliver. Like you had to be able to have dentistry that you were very, very proud of, that looked good. You had to be able to do the photography, and all of those things. You've worked really hard at developing. You've taken lots of courses, and in the clinical dentistry, in the photography, all those things that you had to work to do. So young dentists also have to develop that clinical side of practice as well.
Hey, dental online trainers, just so you know, this is part 1 of our 2-part conversation with Dr. Betsy Bakeman. If you enjoyed the first part of our conversation, then tune in just a couple weeks when we'll be dropping the second part of our interview. You can watch this full episode on YouTube or listen wherever you subscribe to your podcasts. Again, thanks for listening. As always, yours for better dentistry, Dr. Dennis Hartlieb. Well, thanks so much for listening or viewing our Sharecast today. If you enjoy this and you want to get more information from dental online training, then check us out at dothandson.com. That's one word, dothandson.com. And hey, be sure to share this with your friends and colleagues, anyone who you think might benefit from this Sharecast. And please be sure to leave us a 5-star review if you enjoyed our conversation. This podcast is edited by Luna Clark and includes original music by Chris Peterson. And again, thank you for listening. Yours for better dentistry, I'm Dr. Dennis Hartlieb.